We're so sorry we missed you at today's annual kickoff breakfast for the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. I'm here with historian John McCarthy.
Well, Heather, thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to share all the history with your group, because Sarasota's history is fascinating and the role that the business community has played is just amazing. So I hope you enjoy it.
Enjoy the show.
Good morning, everyone. My name's John McCarthy, and I'm here to help you celebrate 100 years of business and commerce in Sarasota and the 100th anniversary of the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to thank Heather Caston and all the great folks at the Chamber for inviting me to participate today. And I'd like to thank Jennifer Romanecki, the CEO and President of Marie Selby Botanical Gardens, for making this presentation possible. Sarasota has an awesome history, and it's impossible to separate the history of Sarasota from the history of business and commerce. They're intertwined. And some of the themes that emerge from our history are perseverance, diversity, and innovation. And we're going to see that come out time and time again as we explore Sarasota history today through the lens of business and commerce. What were the factors that influenced the development of business in Sarasota? Well, number one, it was all the fish in the bay, believe it or not, and the bay itself. Plus, we had deep water Big Pass providing access from the Gulf of Mexico. And then there's the sweeping shoreline, the little crescent of Sarasota Bay, the harbor itself, right here downtown that stretches all the way from here at Marie Selby Botanical Gardens up to Golden Gate Point. But it was all that fish in the bay that started the first real industry here. And these were fishermen who came from the island of Cuba and set up fish camps along the bay. And in those fish camps, it was very typical for the folks from Cuba and Seminole Indians and African Americans to be working together, harvesting the fish, cutting it up, drying it in the sun, packing it in barrels, shipping it back to Havana, where they got solid gold in return. And so this really built the economy of Sarasota. And one of these fish camps was run by a gentleman named Elsworthy, north of where Van Wezel Hall is today. And another one was operated by Philippi, down near Cherokee Park. And yes, Philippi Creek is named for this early pioneer entrepreneur. And recently I heard there might have been another camp down towards where the Landings is today, run by two guys, both with the name of Mike. And so the natural resources that were here in Sarasota were the first thing that attracted business and allowed the people that settled here in this beautiful place on this beautiful bay to prosper and grow local economy. We're here at Gulfstream Avenue and Main Street, and Gulfstream used to be the shoreline of Sarasota Bay. And that tall building behind me is right where Sarasota's first building was downtown. It was a business building and it was a fish oil factory. These two guys came here from New Jersey, the Willard brothers. They had financial backing from New York. The reason why they ended up in Sarasota was because they started to build the factory down in Sanibel, but a big hurricane blew down the building. Obviously, they didn't install PGT windows. But anyway, they took all the wood from the building, they brought it here to Sarasota, they hired workers, they started harvesting fish from the bay, pressing 10 barrels of oil a day that was shipped out and used for paints, lubricants, and ingredients in cosmetics back at that time. This was a big deal for Sarasota because now we had commerce, we had business, and we still had money rolling in. And so another factory was established this year as well, a little bit to the south. And that was set up by the Lancaster brothers from Chicago. Israel and Morris Lancaster brought the Lancaster Cedar Bucket Factory to Sarasota. And they made little buckets and big barrels. And they went out to the Barrier Islands and harvested the red cedar, and that's what they used to build their products that were sold all over the country. And so I think in 1877, we had the first business partnership in Sarasota, where it's highly likely that the Lancaster brothers built the big cedar bins on Siesta Key that then the Willard brothers used to put all their compost in to make their fertilizer. So, innovation, perseverance, diversity, partnership, collaboration, that's what made Sarasota business community great all the way back to 1877. Almost 10 years after those first businesses were formed in Sarasota, we had a whole new aspect to our economy emerge. We shifted from fishing to real estate. And this came about because of a company in Scotland, the Florida Mortgage and Investment Company. And they took one look at this sweeping crescent along Sarasota Bay and this high land right along the waterfront, and they said that would be a great place for a town. And so they began selling real estate in the British Isles to people who were seeking a better economic opportunity. And for £100 sterling, those people got a steamship ticket and a lot downtown. They came in December of 1885 to America, and they were here in Sarasota by January of 1886. Unfortunately, the town had been oversold a little bit. They expected to find homes, businesses, churches, and schools, and instead they found a wilderness, and they learned that they would have to build Sarasota. Many of them were disappointed, but had they made their arrangements through Michael Saunders Real Estate or Hembry and Associates, this would have never been an issue. In any case, Sarasota downtown was platted by that Florida Mortgage and Investment Company, and they used street names like Orange Avenue and Lemon Avenue and Coconut to create this feeling of a tropical paradise to lure people to come here. They also had some other street names that we don't see anymore. Ringling Boulevard was Strawberry, US 41 was Banana, and Central Avenue was Mango. And so those were the words that attracted people to Sarasota, the thought of living in a tropical paradise. And so the people who came here to settle became the workers themselves. And they built a boarding house up at 5 Points, and they built a dock down at the foot of Main Street, right here where we are today. And that dock was really important. But just imagine, you've come from the British Isles, now you're cutting down tall pine trees to create Main Street, you're sharpening the ends so that you can stick them into the bottom of the bay, and then you're dragging them out into the cold water, sticking them up 30 feet in the air and rocking them back and forth to get those piles to go down so we could have a commercial dock. I heard a rumor that Gil Waters saw this, and that's what inspired the creation of FCCI. At any rate, they got the dock built, and that was super important to Sarasota because all the commerce was by water. There were no roads, there would be no railroad for many years to come, and so this dock became really the center of commerce for Sarasota. As the dock was being completed, they started work on a grand hotel. 3 stories, right here on the bayfront, verandas all the way around, and all the way at the top, a little glass room they called the Gulfside Observatory. I understand that the financing came from Gulfside Bank, and I was doing some research the other day, and it seemed like the architect of the hotel was a fellow named Gallagher, and the guys who built it was a guy named Willis and a guy named Smith. At any rate, when they got the hotel done, they wanted to have a huge party. People came from the entire region. They knew they needed some entertainment. So they went over town, found a guy named John Long who liked to play his fiddle. They brought John in. That started the Arts and Cultural District for Sarasota. So by 1887, we had 2 factories, a Main Street, a dock, a boarding house, a hotel, and we were starting to thrive here in Sarasota. By 1899, Sarasota now had regular steamship travel to Tampa, so many more people could come, and there was a way to ship out all the great agricultural products that were being raised here. We also had a telephone that connected to Bradentown. And in 1899, perhaps the biggest thing that happened was that Mr. Cornelius Wilson and his wife Rose brought the Sarasota Times newspaper to Sarasota. And this newspaper was awesome because the visitors would subscribe to it, and then it would get mailed back to their homes and they could read all about what was going on in Sarasota. The newspaper was filled with thoughtful editorials, local news, and little tidbits about the comings and goings of all the residents and visitors, a lot like what the Observer is today. And it was actually Editor Wilson who first proposed the formation of a Chamber of Commerce. It was 1901, and he said, what Sarasota needs most, more than anything else is a progressive Board of Trade or Chamber of Commerce which will concentrate on telling the nation about the superb local attractions. Sarasota wasn't a small town anymore. We were moving and shaking. By 1902, we'd formed a town government. By 1903, the Seaboard Airline Railroad had arrived in Sarasota, making it much easier for people to get here. And in 1904, Harry Heigl and other business leaders formed the Sarasota Commercial Club, the earliest ancestor of today's Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. And then the following year, in 1905, we got our first bank. But before we could have a bank, we had to have a fireproof building. And so the effort to create a bank for Sarasota started a new industry, the manufacture of concrete blocks. And the first concrete block building in the area was right here at 5 Points for the Bank of Sarasota building. And it lent a feeling of permanence and stability to Sarasota and helped us grow in the years to come. We're here on Lemon Avenue, and what's now a beautiful brick paved street was once the tracks of the Seaboard Airline Railroad. They crossed Main Street and ran right out into a dock on Sarasota Bay. But just 6 years after the arrival of the railroad, Dr. Wilson brought the first car to Sarasota. And it wasn't long before there were lots of cars and the need for good roads, hard roads that people could get around town, out to the agricultural areas, down to Venice and all the other places where they wanted to go. And so the Good Roads movement became the call of the Sarasota Board of Trade, kind of a reconstituted commercial club on its way to becoming the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. And in 1911, Bertha Palmer invited the members of the Board of Trade to a reception. And at that reception, she shared her plan, her grand vision for Sarasota. After all, she owned about 50% of the property here, and it involved good roads. So the business leaders put their efforts into creating the Sarasota-Venice Road and Bridge District to build the first hard road in the area, down to Venice, ultimately to Inglewood, and all the way to Fort Myers. This was super important to commerce in Sarasota, and all this road building was getting all the attention. Another strong push by the Board of Trade was to publish booklets about Sarasota, photographs, amazing texts that convinced people that they wanted to come here. Had Sarasota Magazine been around back then, they would have been the publishers. As it was, these booklets went everywhere around the nation and attracted more and more people to come to Sarasota. And in the years of between 1910 and 1920, the population grew an average 9% every year on our way to the Florida real estate boom. We are 6 blocks north of Main Street. We're on Sarasota's African American Main Street. Now it's called Boulevard of the Arts. Back in those days, it was 12th Street, and the crossroads was Mango Avenue, now known as Central. This was a thriving African American community here with its own businesses of entrepreneurs. And we had Josie Washington over here on the corner with her grocery store. She taught kindergarten out of her house at the same time. Next door to her was Mr. Robinson the butcher. Next door to him was Mr. Pinckney's lunchroom. And down the way was James Schofield with his barbershop. Down around the corner this way, we had another lunchroom run by Samuel Albright and another barbershop run by John Mack. Emma Booker started teaching right up the street here in a little wood frame school building. And right around the corner, we got the Payne Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church, and up the street, we got the Bethlehem Baptist Church, 2 of the oldest churches in Sarasota. And so you can see this was a whole community thriving here north of downtown, in spite of how entrepreneurial these business leaders were. Because Jim Crow still had a grip on the South, you didn't see a lot of them joining the Chamber of Commerce. But I have to think that had they been given the opportunity, they would have joined and been part of the business development action here in Sarasota. Following World War I, Sarasota had a lot of catching up to do. We had a couple of roads. We had the hard road from Sarasota to Venice. We had hard roads out to Fruitville and Bee Ridge. But we didn't have enough schools, and we had a rising population. So the business leaders had to take action. And they kept asking Manatee County, because we were all part of Manatee County then, for more improvements. But even though about 40% of Manatee County's tax base was in the Sarasota district, we only got back 20% for improvements, and so it wasn't good enough. a mass meeting was held at the Palmer offices on Pineapple Avenue, and they talked about how we could perhaps create our own county. But they had to weigh what would be the impact on taxes and how would we set everything up. And once the county was created, would we be able to fulfill the dream? Then a follow-up mass meeting where the community learned that the people in Bradenton were trying to get a road project where the Tamiami Trail would bypass Sarasota and head to Arcadia instead. Well, that was the last straw. And that was the point when the residents here realized that they had to create their own county. And this was also when the Board of Trade got really busy, changed their name to the Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. So Sarasota's business leaders got busy to create a new county. W.Y. Perry helped to develop the bill that would be submitted to the legislature. And the plan was for Augustus Wilson, former senator, to actually deliver that bill to the legislature where he expected easy approval. Now, the reason why W.Y. Perry reviewed the bill was because Williams Parker hadn't been established yet and Dan Bailey wasn't born yet. In any case, when that bill went to the legislature, all of a sudden the representatives from Bradenton balked. And so this created a problem, and the business leaders in Sarasota, the members of the Chamber of Commerce, they drove to Bradenton to have what they called a frank conversation. Luckily, business relationships, long-term friendships worked the magic. They were able to resolve the issue, establish the boundaries of the new county, and get the approval to move forward. Believe it or not, the legislature approved it in one day, the governor signed the bill the next day, and all that was left to do was to have an election here in Sarasota to make sure that the community wanted a new county. Well, you know, there were some new voters involved this time. The ladies of Sarasota now had the right to vote, and the Sarasota Times newspaper was then being published by Rose Wilson. So she used all her ink and all her paper to convince all the ladies and all the men to come out and vote to create a new county. And that was approved on July 1st of 1921. So this year we're celebrating 100 years of Sarasota County and 100 years of the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. Sarasota County was created just in time to take advantage of the Florida real estate boom. Thousands of people were moving to Florida. Visitors, tourists, businesses, investors. Florida was on everybody's mind, and Sarasota was now well positioned to build our local economy from that point. So a number of things took place to make this happen. Sarasota Chamber of Commerce organized the International Tarpon Tournament, so people would come here and sports fish, catch these big silver kings, send photographs of them back up north, and bring more people to Sarasota. Another thing that they did was they found out that other communities were not welcoming the tin can tourists. These were campers, people that were pulling homemade and custom-made trailers behind their cars, and they'd come here for months and inspire the local economy. And so when Sarasota Chamber of Commerce found out that other communities weren't welcoming them, they actually built a park to accommodate them. And they kept coming back year after year. And Sarasota kind of became the unofficial international headquarters of the tin can tourists. And some of you might recall how this extended for decades. And Sarasota was also the home of the Airstreamers, who came here every year to infuse the local economy with new cash from out of town. So in the 1920s, the Chamber of Commerce got another idea: spring training baseball. So they convinced John J. McGraw, the owner of the New York Giants, to bring his team to Sarasota. And they got the whole community together to build a baseball diamond at Payne Park, starting a tradition of spring training that's been continued to today. And 90 years later, after that first team came, that same Chamber of Commerce attracted the Baltimore Orioles to come to Sarasota to sustain spring training for our local economy. The boom years of the 1920s was a tremendous time for Sarasota's economy. With all the people coming, new hotels were built, skyscrapers, all sorts of new businesses started, and everyone was prospering. Real estate values seemed to double every day. More and more people were coming to Sarasota to take advantage of this tropical paradise. This is also the time when our architecture started to change, and we saw Mediterranean revival architecture, stucco, barrel tile, arch top windows. It was all designed to make Sarasota look like old world Europe, to convey a feeling of permanence and stability, and it worked. People loved it, and people just thrived here in Sarasota during those years. But like all good things, the boom had to come to an end. And it came to an end here in 1927, 2 years before the 1929 stock market crash. And all of a sudden, we had problems with our economy. Once again, Sarasota Chamber of Commerce comes to the rescue, convinces Circus King John Ringling to bring his winter quarters to Sarasota. And out on North Beneva Road, they established the multi-acre circus winter quarters, the Big Top, the Menagerie Building, all the training areas. And this became Sarasota's greatest tourist attractions, one of the biggest tourist attractions in Florida, and it was here from 1927 all the way to 1959. In the prior years of the early 1920s, they had called Sarasota the air-conditioned city. The slogan was where the summer spends the winter. But now with John Ringling's Circus Winter Quarters, we were Circus City, USA, and we were on the national map. As the Great Depression created a bigger burden on Sarasota, the Chamber of Commerce went to work again, this time to attract an airline. And in 1937, they brought National Airlines to Sarasota, and that started what's now the Sarasota-Bradenton International Airport. The waiting room was an open-air porch with a couple of rocking chairs, but it was just what Sarasota needed to bring in just a few more people into the local economy. The Chamber also went to work seeking federal funds for Sarasota, and with those funds, the Lido Casino was built, an amazing dance hall and bathing pavilion on Lido Beach with all the seahorses that had become so iconic of Sarasota. Also the Municipal Auditorium. And the Civilian Conservation Corps with federal money came and created Myakka River State Park. So Sarasota began to see the end of the Depression, people were working again, the Chamber was happy again, and just when things were getting better, we encounter World War II. Now in World War II, they took the Sarasota airport and they made it into an Army Air Corps training base. And all the servicemen and women who served here fell in love with Sarasota. They'd been to the Lido, they had been out to see all the great things in Sarasota, and they wanted to move here. And so the 1950s saw the birth of the suburban subdivision. Places like Paver Park, Kensington Park, Southgate, and others. And those became the new places for retirees and families to move to. And at the same time, the business was shifting too. And instead of coming downtown to shop, you went to the Ringling Shopping Center or Southgate. And it was just like a main street with all the shops you needed lined up, but with plenty of parking and closer to your homes. That was a real shift for Sarasota, and one that would take a long time to bring back the vitality to Sarasota's downtown. During all that growth of the 1950s, the Chamber was always advocating for better schools and more schools, and fantastic schools were built throughout the Sarasota area, many of them to the ultra-modern designs of the Sarasota School of Architecture. But it wasn't what they looked like that was important, it was what was going on inside. And the Chamber wanted to make sure that the youth of Sarasota got the best education that they possibly could. So with Sarasota well provisioned with public schools, the Chamber turned their attention to a college. And they came up with the idea for New College. And they were able to obtain the Charles Ringling Estate, the historic property here on the bayfront, next door to the Ringling Museum, as the place for that school. Took a couple of years to put it all together, and next thing you know, we had the first class at New College here on this campus. A few years later, University of South Florida comes to Sarasota. And then, over time, that art school founded by John Ringling himself became accredited as a 4-year college, the Ringling College of Art and Design, a school so good it ought to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. While Florida was still largely a wilderness, we had some exciting things happening here, like the effort to put man on the moon. And Sarasota played a large role in that effort. A company out on Fruitville Road called Electromechanical Research had been involved in working as a contractor for NASA to develop communications technology so that we could have satellites orbiting the planet. And then, when it came time to put man on the moon, they reached out to the same company to develop communication strategies for the Mercury, Gemini, and Saturn V programs. And believe it or not, they took pulse code modulators, 2 VHS transmitters, and a tape recorder and created the communication system that brought man to the moon and back to Earth again. Now, if you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, you know there's a lot of people behind the scenes that made this possible. And in the case of EMR, it was mostly women who were doing the work behind the scenes to put man on the moon, launching Sarasota into a whole new future, again, rich with diversity, rich with perseverance, and rich with innovation. Thanks to everyone for allowing me to come here today and share with you a little bit about Sarasota's business leadership history. I hope you've learned something, and I hope it makes you prideful to be here in Sarasota. You know, Sarasota, like all great cities, has had its ups and downs, but the business leadership always finds a creative way to make things better here. And that's what's great about Sarasota, and that's what's great about the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. So once again, I'd like to thank you for having me with you today, and thank the great folks at Marie Selby Botanical Gardens for making this production possible.